Hi everybody, it's Miss Ramsey and
Ellie.
Ellie. Do you remember her? Say hey to everybody. And I have
Nut dog.
Bernard, otherwise known as Nard Dog.
And
We just wanted to tell everybody hi.
And Lucy is right there if you can see her.
Lucy is over here, but she's too big.
Lucy, come here. Lucy, come here.
Come here, Lucy.
Come here, Lucy.
Lucy,
Come over here.
come here.
Ah. Oh.
Lucy.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Lucy, come here.
Lucy.
Well, she's trying, but she's a little too big.
Yeah, and she's 3, but she's only in her crate now.
Yep.
Look.
And this is Bernard. He's 10, so he's an old man compared to her. Oh, he just tried to give me a kiss. Bernard, give me kisses. Give me kisses. Can I have a kiss? All right. Anyway, here, Ellie's going to take him. And then I am going to read to us today.
Yay, goodbye, y'all.
So, yesterday, if you remember, we left off with there was a colonel. And if you don't know what a colonel is, it's another name for somebody who's in charge. But there was a colonel there who he said that it was his mission to be able to hunt and kill a catamount. So imagine how Serafina is feeling right now. So we're going to see what happens. As the evening proceeded through the 7 courses of the meal, Colonel Braddock continued with what were meant to be enthralling stories of his bravery and grit. All the while, Serafina watched as the dark-haired girl named Jess sat quietly across from her. The girl ate her food. She drank her water. She never looked at Colonel Braddock, and she didn't seem to be listening to him. But she glanced at the other guests and the details of the room, one after another in rapid succession, her eyes glistening in the candlelight as she took in her surroundings. When Jess's eyes finally fell upon Serafina, the girl studied her for just a moment before her eyes flickered away again. But Serafina had the impression that Jess took in more information in that split second than any other person might do in an hour. After dinner, as everyone was getting up from the table, Mrs. A. Scott said, "Well, it was very nice to meet you, young lady." It took Serafina a beat to realize that the woman was speaking to her. Flustered, she said, "It was very nice to meet you as well, Mrs. A. Scott." She bowed slightly as she had seen the other girls do. "I hope you enjoy your stay at Biltmore." "Oh, yes, of course. How could I not enjoy myself in such a peaceful and lovely place as this?" Mrs. A. Scott said warmly, gesturing to the grand scale of the room. Serafina turned and looked across the table to say goodbye to Jess, but was disappointed to see that she had already left. When someone close beside her touched Serafina's arm, she jumped, startled, and turned quickly. "I didn't mean to," Jess began to say apologetically. "No, it's fine. It's just me," Serafina said, trying to explain. "I liked seeing your friends earlier," Jess interrupted. "I wish they had stayed a little longer." "My friends?" Serafina said in surprise, then realized who she must be talking about. Who do you think her friends were? She didn't think anyone had noticed her little rat catcher slinking around in the shadows of the huge room. "How did you know they were mine?" Serafina asked, not trying to deny it, but mighty curious. "I saw them listening to you," Jess said. "They're usually decidedly bad at that," Serafina said with a smile. Jess smiled and returned. "What are their names?" "The dark, quiet one is Smoke, and the little orange ball of clawed fur is Ember," Serafina said. Jess was about to say something in reply, but visibly winced when Colonel Braddock's voice clanged like a broken bell across the banquet hall. "Come on, gents. It's finally time to get this party started," he bellowed, putting his arm roughly around the squeamish Mr. Turner and dragging him from the room. "I didn't think that meal would ever end. 7 courses? My goodness, who on this planet ever needs more than 5? Could you imagine how instead of just having one meal that you have like a little portion and you do have like 7 different things to eat? That'd be crazy. Dinner time would take forever. As Colonel Braddock, Mr. Turner, Mr. Stolston, and many of the other hunters left the room, Jess said calmly, "They're going to go play poker now." 3 seconds later, Colonel Braddock's voice rose above the others. "Let's play some poker in Vanderbilt's billiard room." Colonel Braddock and his group pulled their drinks from their pockets as they headed to their card games. Many of the other guests wandered over to the salon to enjoy an after-dinner coffee or stepped outside onto the lagaya to partake of the late-night air. Another group availed themselves of a tour of the winter garden with Mrs. Vanderbilt, but Serafina noticed that Mr. Vanderbilt and Lieutenant Kinsley remained in the banquet hall, standing near the fireplace at the far end of the room, talking privately in hushed voices, sometimes looking toward the billiard room as they were hatching some sort of plan. The bellowing voice of Colonel Braddock could still be heard ringing through the corridors of the great house. "Listen," Jess said, leaning toward Serafina with a conspiratorial whisper. "Don't let him fool you. He'll drink and gamble most of the night, but that won't stop him from getting up early in the morning to go hunting. You need to leave here and warn whoever you need to warn." Serafina looked at her in surprise. This girl was getting downright spooky now. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Warn who?" "I saw your reaction earlier," she said. "You weren't just put off by his story about mountain lions. You were angry and you were scared, and not for yourself. I could see it." Serafina just gazed at her, unsure of what to make of this peculiar girl with the eyes of a hawk. Should she pretend she didn't know what she was talking about? Should she deny it? Was there even any point in denying it? The girl seemed to already know. "You have to understand," Jess said. "He's not just an aggravating person. He's a liar and a cheater as well. He said that in the days ahead he's going to use his skills and experience to track a mountain lion, but the truth is he's already hired a local man with a pack of hunting dogs to do the work for him. As soon as the tracker finds a mountain lion, the colonel will go to its den and shoot it. Then he'll tell everyone grand and exciting stories about what a great hunter he is." Serafina tried to stay calm, but a jolt of new fear ran through her. Her brother and sister were out there, and Colonel Braddock was going to hunt them down. "How do you know all this?" Serafina asked in amazement. But before she could answer, Colonel Braddock's voice rose up above the voices of the other men in the billiard room. "Oh, yes, I'm sure she'll be tagging along," he replied to a question that someone had asked him. "She's a good, obedient girl, tougher than you might think out on the trail, but I gotta tell you, gents, she's a god-awful terrible shot with a rifle. She couldn't hit the side of a barn if her life depended on it. And sometimes she's unbelievably loud with her feet when we're trying to stalk up on a good kill. She sounds like a herd of trampling elephants in those girly boots of hers." Who do you think they're talking about? As the entire room of men erupted into laughter, Serafina looked at Jess. Her face was quiet of expression, almost emotionless, as if she had heard that same joke so many times it didn't affect her anymore. "You're Colonel Braddock's daughter," Serafina said softly. "He makes me go out on his hunts with him," Jess said, "but I'm a liar too." "What do you mean?" "My bullet always hits a tree," Jess said. Serafina smiled, liking that answer and the girl who had said it. "She's like any girl, I guess," Colonel Braddock was telling his friends, "totally worthless at the practical things in life. But I gotta bring her along or she'd have no place else to go, poor little soul. Her mother's been gone all these years now, left us to fend for ourselves nearly from day one. Tuberculosis, God rest her soul." And tuberculosis is a disease that you can get that's very deathly. As Colonel Braddock droned on in the distance, Jess stepped closer to her. "We lived and traveled in Africa for years," Jess said. "When I was very young, I remember my father asking me all kinds of questions when we were out hunting, day after day, year after year." "What kinds of questions?" Serafina asked. "He'd ask things like, which of these game paths do you think looks more trodden than the other? And what kind of animal makes this kind of track in the dirt? For a long time, I thought he was asking me because he was trying to teach me, and maybe he was, I don't know." "But what happened?" Serafina urged her, fascinated by her story. "I had heard that the African leopard was one of the most elusive and beautiful animals in all the world. I had always wanted to see one. I learned where they lived, what kind of tracks they made, and how they behaved. Finally, I spotted a gorgeous leopardess sleeping high up in a tree, nearly impossible to see." "Was she amazing?" Serafina whispered, envious of seeing such an animal. My father shot her, Jess said bitterly. It was at that moment that I realized the true purpose of my father's questions. For the last few years, he wasn't teaching me. He had no idea that leopards frequented this particular part of the savannah or that they preferred those types of trees. And he had no idea of the particular way in which they had draped their sleeping bodies over a branch so that their spots camouflaged them just right, and his eyes weren't that good. As Serafina listened to Jess's story, she began to understand the level of trust that Jess was putting in her. She must have seen something in her, not just that she could share this story, but that she should share it. My father had used my skills to track the leopardess and kill her, Jess said, and I realized that he had been doing that for years. I swore in that moment that I would never show my true self to my father again. I'm so sorry, Jess, Serafina said, touching her shoulders. But the truth is, I thank my father every day, Jess said. What do you mean? A daughter grows up watching her father, seeing everything he does. Whether he realizes it or not, he is teaching her. From my father, I learned what I most don't want to be. Serafina looked at Jess, and Jess looked back at her. This time, Jess's sapphire eyes did not flit away. She held Serafina's gaze. It was as if it was in this moment that the two of them were truly meeting each other. I understand, Serafina said, touching her arm in the way Jess had tried to touch hers earlier. Thank you for warning me about your father. I mean it. I truly appreciate it. You'd do the same for me, right? Jess said, a ting of hope in her voice as she looked up at her. Serafina nodded. Yes, I would, she said, but she couldn't help but wonder exactly how Jess had determined that about her so quickly. Do you know me somehow? No, Jess said, a little surprised by the question. I just got here yesterday. You saw me arrive. Wait, Serafina said, startled. Did you see me when you arrived? You were on the terrace behind the stone railing, Jess said. This girl truly does see everything, Serafina thought, and as they were talking, Jess's eyes flickered over to the main corridor. A messenger had come in and was now walking toward Colonel Braddock. A moment later, Colonel Braddock and several of his men hurried out of the billiard room. He never leaves a card game that quickly, Jess said, her voice tight with worry. What's it mean? Serafina asked, feeling herself already relying on this girl's startling powers of observation. The local tracker he hired must have found something. Jess, the colonel barked. Jess jumped at the shout. Get out of that gown and into your hunting clothes. We're going out right now. You'd better get going, Jess whispered to Serafina. I will, right away, but please tell me, why are you helping me like this? Jess looked her in the eye. Because I've seen too many dead cats. Dun, dun, dun. So not only does Serafina have to protect herself, think about who else she has to protect. All right, guys, I will see you tomorrow. Bye. I miss you.